So for the past year and a half, everybody is focusing on the interest rate and what's going on in the housing market. And rightfully so, because we've seen one of the most stagnant market in the last 20 years, with places like Vancouver and Toronto, detached homes seeing significant drops in some areas. And to quote the famous Earl Nightingale, whenever there is danger, there lies opportunity. Since last year, I have some clients took advantage of this drop and went and got themselves some detached homes, redeveloped them when the interest rate is lower. Now, most of them, including myself, thought that if we're gonna redevelop, the most we could do is probably take a detached home, build it into a duplex, and try to sell them that way. Nobody paid attention to the fact that Vancouver last year have passed big changes to their bylaws in order to allow a lot of detached homes to build into multiplex. Now, I read about this last year, but I thought it was just small changes for developers to build them easier. But these changes turned out to be quite big, opening the door to smaller developer or even an investor with not much experience in able to tap into this area, and it turns out it may be quite profitable. Now, I got all these from a firm called Victor Eric Build and Design. I was lucky enough to be invited by them to do a podcast on general financial planning tips when it comes to real estate. Now, during our break, I got to talking with them and I asked them what is the latest trend right now given the interest rate is so high. They said actually a lot of people have stopped building detached homes for the last year and more people are getting into the multiplex space. They were kind enough to arrange another meeting and spend almost an hour with me breaking down the process and how do numbers work for some of the real clients. So while the market is still slow and this hasn't become a common knowledge yet, I want to make this video, and in case you're thinking about developing your land, this may be something you want to think about. Now, before we start, make sure you help me comment, like, and share this video, and also join our private Facebook group if you want to ask questions or get more content. Without further ado, let's dive into this week's video. Now, before we jump into it, there are three things I want to make clear. Number one, this is not a sponsored video nor an ad. They did not pay me to say any of these things. I simply wanted to learn and I approached them and asked them for details. And second of all, I'm not promoting them in any way. I've never used their service. I only did a podcast interview with them. So if you want to use them or some other firm, do your own research. And finally, I'm not an expert in the multiplex space. I've only done financial planning on clients' personal side for the renovation, rebuild, and maybe doing it into a duplex. I've actually never been involved in the building process myself. So all the numbers, all the info I'm sharing today is from Victor Eric. I'm not an expert, so please do your own research before you make any decisions. So first, let's talk about what is multiplex and what's the general requirement to consider building. Multiplex is basically subdividing your land into smaller parcels and building on top of it with semi-detached homes. A typical multiplex is usually 3 to 6 units, so kind of like a miniature townhome project. Now, because we're turning a land into a higher density build, there is some requirement on what type of land we're allowed to build this on. According to city guidelines, the land must be zone R1-1 in Vancouver, which is formerly all R zones, or RT7 or RT9. It must have an alley or be corner lot between two streets, must not be in a flood zone, and must be more than 32.8 foot frontage and 99.7 foot deep. So right away, I see this rule out about maybe half of the land in Lower Mainland. So if you're building a multiplex, make sure you pay attention to this minimal requirement. Now, obviously, there is a whole slew of other requirements such as tree protection, etc., which I'm not going to try to explain here because I'm not knowledgeable enough to do this. And also, it's so complex, I think you don't need to know it anyway. You're going to have some pros to do it for you. However, if you really want to learn and find out, I have attached the city's guideline in the description below. All right, next then, let's dive into the numbers, which is what we're here for. So on the screen, you can see this is a real proforma and a project that Victor Eric have shared with us. This is something they're going through with one of their clients. Without revealing the location, it is somewhere within this circle. As you can see, this is a pretty high-end site and a pretty high-end project. Now first, let's look at the high-level details. This is a 4-unit build. It is going to build around 7,800 square foot at 100% efficiency. Estimated gross sale price will be $1,350 per square foot for a total of 10.5 mil. Now, the square footage at first glance seems fairly high, but we have to remember the location we're building at. And if you're from Vancouver, you know that place is going to be the next landmark with the Oak Ridge Mall. I'm not a real estate expert. I don't know how much it's selling right now or how much it may be selling after it's done, but I wouldn't be surprised once it's done building the Oak Ridge Mall, those places might be selling at that price easily. So the lot is purchased for $3.4 million with $85,000 in property transfer tax plus closing costs. We're looking at $3.5 million. Client will be required to fund $2 million of this purchase and finance the other $1.5 million. Now there is a $320,000 of development management fee as you can see, but I'm going to skip this part first and then come back to it later on as we discuss costs in detail. For the building, we have about $600,000 in pre-construction costs such as permit, environmental assessment, architecture, drawings, etc. The build cost is about $400 per square foot. Victor Eric told me this is a pretty safe assumption, so it's going to be $3.1 million in total. They added 10% as a contingency cost on top, so now it's $3.4 million plus $600K of pre-construction on top, so it takes about $4 million to build. Now, out of this, the client has to fund $500K out of their pocket and finance the other $3.5 million. Finally, we have two other costs. The first one being about $320,000-ish in marketing, legal, and other costs. This is the cost to sell these multiplex to other people. Also, the financing is based on 8% interest rate, so the client will have to pay about $600K in interest over this project's timeline. So the total cost to build comes out to be $8.8 million for a 4-unit multiplex around Oak Ridge. And if they're able to sell it for $10.5 million in total, they would get a net return of $1.75 million. Now for this project specifically, the client is going to undergo a 30-70 split. Maybe there's other partners involved. So for their 70% profit, it will come out to be $1.2 million. And compare that to the 2.5 they put in, that is 49% return on the money. And over 24 months, this comes out to be 22% compounded return per year, according to Victor Eric. Now, like I said, I'm not an expert in this field. I don't know how much risk we're taking on to build these projects. So I don't know if a 22% a year return is an attractive return or not in this space. Now, as a normal investors, if I'm looking at this with 2.5 mil and you're telling me I can do 22% a year for next 2 years, that does seems like a pretty good return. But again, I don't know. So if you have experience in this space, you think it's otherwise, let me know in the comment down below, educate me. All right, next, so let's dive deeper and look at some of these costs closely. Now, they have walked me through the whole thing. When I was learning this, they showed me all the numbers. But for this video, they've asked me not to show every single number on this page just because a lot of them are proprietary. It is their own pricing structure. They don't want their competitors to know, obviously. So I'm going to respect that. I'm not going to show everything. But they allow me to list all the items that you will have to pay for in your project. On top of that, they allow me to talk about the 3 biggest costs that which may come to a surprise for investors or builders. The first one being density bonus. So this is something new. It's the first time I've heard of this. So basically, if you're building a higher density within Lower Mainland, you do have to build some sort of amenities for the people around it. If you're not going to build amenities, then in return, you have to give the city some cash. Here is a chart from the city showing that depending on the areas you're building, how big your lot is, and how much square footage you're building, how much per square foot you will have to pay for this density bonus. So as you can see, the more west you're going on this map, the more expensive it will get, and it gets expensive pretty quickly. So for this project, they're saying it's about $120,000 in cost. The second big item is the utility upgrade. Now, because you're building one home into maybe 3 to 6, you do require more power. In order to do this, you have to install one of those green utility boxes we see on the street all the time in order to draw enough power for every home. And this is quite expensive. It can cost anywhere from $100 to $150K. And finally, the last big item is the development/design fees. And within here, there are 3 big categories to consider: development fee, construction fee, and design fee. Development is getting all the permits, all the drawing done. This is before you start building. Construction is construction, and design fee is the interior design fee. This is something that can vary greatly firm to firm and also per client, because you actually don't need to pay for all 3 if you don't have to. A lot of times Victor Eric have told me that some of their clients are actually builders themselves, so they will engage Victor Eric not for the building or construction side because they know how this works, but they're engaging them maybe to use their interior design. So depending on your expertise, you may not have to pay for all 3. Victor Eric also told me that if you do bundle them together to mix into 1 or 2 fees, like a package deal, it is going to be a lot cheaper than trying to break them apart and pay one at a time. So this is where the $320,000 of development fee it is. It is a bundle fee for development and construction, and for design, they're quoting around $75K to $100K for this project. Now, Victor Eric said that one additional bonus to have everything managed by one firm is that they will usually send a monthly report to the client to update the build progress as they go. Now, from hearing stories from my clients who are mainly actually doing duplexes or a massive interior redesign or rebuild, some clients have done everything in-house, some other clients have done, a mix of different firms providing different areas of services. From the gist of it, it seems like people that have it all in-house usually handle it much better, and there's much less chance to go over budget. Whereas the people that are, kind of piecemeal together, I've seen some projects gone maybe 20, 30, even 40% over budget, which really turn you from a profitable project into a negative one easily. Now, I don't know if it's poor communication, I don't know if it's poor projections, but I have seen it happening for the piecemeal side. So if you're a newbie, then maybe you want to consider something that's in-house. I'm not promoting Victor Eric here. Use whoever you like. Just telling you what I've been hearing from my clients. All right, so finally, let's go over some Q&A where I've asked additional questions. I want to share them with you guys. So first question I have for them was, do I always need a land and also a massive capital to start in this? So Victor Eric said that not really. There's many ways to structure this. In this case, client is buying the land and providing some of the capital, but in other cases, you might be just bringing money, or you just bring in the land, or you're partnering with other people like a GP LP split, and you're buying this or doing this together. And depending on how much effort you're putting in, usually you can expect something like a 30-70 model. This is the common one they say. Second question I had is what kind of income I need to fund a project like the one we just went through. Victor Eric said that you actually don't need to look at income too much. For the bank to do something like this, it's all about equity. They want to know, how much it will cost. They want to know the team you're working with, whether they have experience doing this or not. So this is where maybe if you're new and you're doing this for the first time, if you aren't working with a very experienced firm, maybe you don't even get the financing from the bank. So that's another thing to consider. Next, I asked them what is the difference between building less units versus more units. They told me that if you're building more than 4 units, you do have to do an additional disclosure for this project, which will cost you more money. And also, if you're building 12 or more, usually the bank will now come back and require you to do a pre-sale like an actual developer. And finally, I asked them, what do they think is the biggest risk when it comes to these kind of projects? They've named 4 that in their experience have seen which can be major obstacles. The first one is obviously interest rate, because the loan you're securing is not a fixed rate loan, it's a variable loan. So if the rates keep increasing like we have seen, it can really put a dent in your project. Also, obviously, is the market condition, because at the end of the day, you're probably going to sell this to another buyer. So if the market isn't moving, then you might be stagnant and you may not be able to sell this for many months, which will be very detrimental to your project. The third one is having a competent team. Again, this is where, a firm that specializes and know what they're doing is super important. And we're incurring a lot of interest costs every month. So the moment you start, you better finish this quickly and finish it in time. So having a competent team, making sure you can hit all the deadline is extremely important. And the final obstacle is material cost. Victor Eric said that for them, they usually get a fixed price contract, CCDC with their contractors, so there is less fluctuation in cost. But they said that if the cost shifts during the design phase before you start building, then there's not much choice. You will have to take the higher price. However, if the cost is volatile during building phase, then either the contractor has to eat the increase in cost, or they might come back for a slight negotiation on a fixed price contract. Unless it's something like COVID where things are just completely out of whack and you have to renegotiate the whole thing, a fixed price contract really can't help you there. But the manager said COVID was the only time within his last 20 years where they have seen something like this happen. Alright, so that's everything that I've shared with me. Finally, let's go over some of my personal thought after learning this. Now, obviously, this is still a pretty capital intensive project as we can see. However, I do think the scope now is small enough for an bigger investor, like where you don't have to be a developer to start getting into this field. I do see multiplex to get a lot more popular as we see rates drop and financing become more and more affordable. And I think there's a little bit of first mover advantage here, because as we see, these projects takes around 2 years to complete, and the labor shortage for construction can get intensive sometimes. So if more and more of these projects start, they're gonna, eat up all the labor, they're gonna withhold all those labors, and subsequent investors or builders coming in try to replicate will have to pay a higher cost. And finally, if you're thinking about starting this, you probably need to spend a lot of time assembling your team together. It's not just the builder. You probably need a very good CPA, maybe a corporate lawyer or a lawyer well versed in this area, because to fund this, you probably have to sell a lot of stuff, and with the new capital rule change, that could be more taxes for you. It could be a little bit of corporate structure you're looking at. You could be doing a partnership, so you might be doing a Section 97 to roll your land into a partnership to bring other people on board. It's quite a bit of stuff. All right, so that's everything about Multiplex. Honestly, I've had a lot of fun doing a podcast and also learning from them. I've learned a lot more about Multiplex than I did before. Hopefully you have to. Hopefully this video give you some ideas if you want to get started in this space. But I do want to hear from you. Do you have other info you want to share about Multiplex that I haven't talked about? Let me know in the comment down below. Also, if you're starting in this space or considering it, let me know as well. I want to hear your thought process and your process of putting everything together. I'm super interested to learn. If you like these kind of videos, I do upload them every 2 weeks, so make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to the video. Click the bell button so you get all the notifications in the future. This is Jacky. I hope you liked this video. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye!